Communism, or rather the specter of communism, is haunting America. Over the past year, the list of winners in the Democratic Party primaries are internal party elections to decide who will run in the general election, has started to resemble a party congress of the early 20th century Communist Party of the Soviet Union, including milkmaids. In addition to Zaharan Mamdani, who became the mayor of New York, the Democratic Socialists of America, which is a part of the Democratic Party, managed to get their candidates elected to dozens of positions in city councils, from Minneapolis and Detroit to the U.S. Congress. Since 2018, I would say that more than 300 candidates supported by the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America, have won elections at various levels. Only in June and July of this cycle, socialists achieved victories. Well, the most famous one was in New York, where they won 3 seats in Congress. They haven't been elected yet, but since New York is so blue, most likely whoever won the Democratic Party primary will go to Congress. In Denver, there was someone named Milat Quiros who defeated the congresswoman, whose name was Diana Digit. She had been in office for 15 terms, I think. It was long past time for her to retire. Not to say go to the cemetery, but somewhere in that direction it was time for her to move on. She kept winning and winning and winning. And then a young woman, Pora Poracel, came along and ate her alive. So a change of power is being prepared in Washington. In the city, the District of Columbia, which is the very nest where a socialist, a hardcore socialist like Janice George, who is basically the future mayor, in New York, in Denver, and now in Washington. The organization grew from 6,000 members during Bernie Sanders' 2016 campaign to more than 100,000 today. So he did a really great job, Bernie. And many people call him the son of Trotsky. Well, I don't think they mean it literally. It's no longer a fringe sect, it's a well-funded machine. A lot of people are investing in it. They felt the power, they sensed the wolves. With volunteers, with media support, you can imagine it, right? Marxists, though they don't call themselves communists, but democratic socialists, at least in theory, the ideas these people openly promote aren't even softened. It's not capitalism, but a classic Marxist set. The seizure of the means of production, well, that means depriving everyone of private property. The formula that Mamdani voiced, well, actually, he probably started saying it back in 2021. He's known for repeating it. He's on record saying it. The abolition of private property and the elimination of the police, prisons, and immigration service. In other words, everything that prevents them from seizing power as tools of state violence. I agree that this is state violence. I agree that these are tools. But you can't just abolish them. You can replace them. How is it better if you don't know that there is something better? You have to find that better option. You didn't invent it. You found it, tested it, and only then should you replace them. Next, there's a truly remarkable thesis that billionaires as a class shouldn't exist at all. It's basically saying, your money or your life. Zaharan Mamdani. So this is the mayor of New York. When CNN asked him directly if he likes capitalism, he answered briefly, guess how? No, he didn't say yes, he said no, in his own archive. And he has 16,000 posts which were recently analyzed by a journalist from the Free Press. Well, today with AI, with artificial intelligence, all this is easy, right? For years he wrote about the end of the free market. For years he wrote about the end of the free market. Well, Mark's a real Marxist. Formally, he is a democratic socialist, but his ideological framework is Marxist-Leninist. I'd even say possibly Trotskyist too. Doraliza Avila Chevalier. A beautiful name, the one who beat the 5-term incumbent. People come to Congress or the Senate and just stay because they build connections and get into you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours deals. It's impossible to get rid of them. And they themselves have to vote for term limits. Well, are they crazy or something? Yeah, maybe they're idiots, but they're not crazy. So she defeated a 5-term congressman, someone like Adriano Espaito, in the 13th District of New York, I think. She refused to say clearly in an interview with the New York Times whether a murderer should be in prison after killing someone. Should he be in prison after that? Why? According to Bill Maher, she talked about interracial relationships, Not sexual ones, just relationships between races. Even the experienced James Carville, one of the main theorists of the Democratic Party, listened to this and said, I'm not in the same party as this woman. And he's seen all kinds of people and things, lunatics, crazies, fascists. For the first time ever, he said, no, I'm not in the same party as this woman. Claire Valdez, who replaced Nadia Velasquez in New York's 7th District, is shaping the district's rhetoric, the demand to abolish the agency for catching and deporting illegal immigrants, because catching illegals is fascism. Brad Lander, he was the comptroller of New York, meaning, so to speak, he was an educator, so to speak. A person with higher education should be, I think, already a doctor and so on and so forth. He claims that American support for Israel makes the U.S. complicit in genocide. He is Jewish. And he admitted, so he said in an interview, yes, I might be a white racist because I was born white-skinned. So just because a person was born with white skin, he automatically became a racist. These aren't fringe figures, I understand. So if before, in arguments or conversations, I would give someone an example, they'd say, oh, come on, that's just, give me an example of someone from, well, here you go. Now I can give one example after another of people from there. These are future or current members of the U.S. Congress.
Yeah.
Brand statistics, 100 years, 20 years, and today. What caught my interest was that I started looking at the numbers. By brand, I mean socialism. 100 years ago. Well, in 1912, the socialist Eugene Debs received 6% of the votes in the presidential election. And that was the absolute historical ceiling for socialism in America. Up until, so to speak, the 21st century, that was the absolute maximum that a socialist had ever received. After that, there was McCarthyism, there was the Cold War. The word socialism itself was political suicide. But 20 years ago, let's say, in the mid-2000 essay, positive attitude towards socialism in polls was already at about 35%. A third of the country had a positive attitude toward the idea that something was taken from some and given to others. Well, he has a lot. He has 2 chairs. Why does he need 2 chairs? I don't have any. We should take one from him, it doesn't matter if he earned it or not, and give it to me because I also need to sit. Well, then go and earn it yourself. No, he's bad because he earned enough for 2 chairs.
Well,
still, even that 35%, even within the Democratic Party, was seen as a marginal position. That is, you couldn't come out and say, I'm a socialist and expect to be elected. In August 1925, Gallup conducted a poll, and they found a completely staggering figure. The Democratic Party. 66% of Democrats have a positive attitude towards socialism. That is, they like it when something is taken from someone and given to them. They like receiving things, but dislike when something is taken from them and given to others. Now, 42% among Democrats said that they, well, more or less have a positive view of capitalism. Well, some more, some less. Yes. Why did this happen? How did it turn out this way? We were coming here, gentlemen, we were coming here to the bastion of capitalism, and it turns out that in one of the 2 main parties, 66% think socialism is good, and we ran away from it. I see 2 reasons why this happened. The first one. Communists, socialists, Marxists, Maoists, Democrats. Trotskyists, call them whatever you want, conduct systematic, constant, continuous propaganda, starting from kindergarten. Continuing in school and not stopping at college, at universities too. You leave that stage of life, but you keep getting bombarded by people who have just graduated from university, who go to work in newspapers, magazines, on the internet, as lawyers, prosecutors, judges, and so on. They keep pushing the same message on us. That's their job. Their first idea is to enlighten all of us and eliminate injustice. The injustice is that someone worked hard and earned a lot of money. They say the parents worked hard, earned a lot of money, and passed it on to their children. So now there's this brainwashing conveyor belt they've set up, right? It's been working for decades already and doesn't stop for a single day. I know this for sure, and my children have been subjected to it. And now my grandchildren, thank God, well, I have, let's say, 3. All 3 were definitely subjected to this indoctrination. It didn't work with 2 of them. It seems to have worked with 1, unfortunately. What can I do? And now 2 little ones are about to get on that conveyor belt. I already suspect that in nurseries and kindergartens, right at the very beginning, they also start this indoctrination. The leadership in our country is mostly made up of members of the Democratic Party. Either they didn't pay attention to this or they thought it was a good thing. For what? To hold on to power. Why else could this be considered a good thing? The dumber the people, the easier it is to hold on to power. And if this is good for keeping power, then what do they care about anything else? They don't care. They couldn't care less about it. The fact that the country might fall into the abyss doesn't bother them at all, but they'll stay in their positions, getting their hefty salaries. And of course, those who have advanced, who are the best, who didn't pay attention, will naturally have what they want. They also get special accounts to spend from. Maybe the money is limited, but it doesn't matter at all where you spend it. It's all supposedly for the good of the motherland. Besides your salary, you can also fill your bathtub with champagne and get in. They've done this more than once, taking photos or making videos of themselves pouring champagne into the tub and then bathing in it. In my opinion, you can't think of anything more foolish, right? But still, that's what they do. If a person has the opportunity and enough money and they want to show off to someone, that's exactly what they do. Okay. So they also really love to do another wonderful thing that has always amazed me. They love to borrow money from banks or from the public, promise high interest rates, and spend that money. But it's their children and grandchildren who have to pay it back, and they don't care about that at all. Read everything I said earlier. The second one, then. The second one. Free market supporters practically don't fight back through education. No one systematically explains to children and students what America is, what capitalism is, or how one differs from the other. That yes, there are negative sides, but they're 10% and 90, or maybe 20%, but 80% are positive, while under socialism, monarchy, feudalism, or any other ism, 80% is terrible, and 20% is positive, of course. Of course, there's something good in anything. The Soviet Union had good education. Positive. It's true they taught what they needed. We weren't taught languages, just in case, because what if we make a hole into Europe and start peeking through that hole to see what's happening there? So, no one systematically explains to people here in America what freedom is, where it comes from. Ronald Reagan said something about this that's worth remembering. Freedom is not automatically inherited. You have to fight for it. You have to protect it and pass it on. If one generation doesn't explain to them what freedom is, that generation will lose that freedom. I apologize for the clumsy translation of what he said because he said it much better. I'm very afraid that these words will turn out to be prophetic. Because it's already 3 generations, not just 1, 3 generations who haven't been taught what freedom is. And they're ready to ruin America because they don't understand the value and uniqueness of what was created here. When you tell them America is an absolutely unique country, they laugh. This is what happens when one side teaches and the other stays silent. And now I'm going to tell you something interesting. Liberals, those who are on that side and all, they all called themselves liberals. There were very few real ones among them, but there were some. Liberal comes from liber, which means freedom. They are horrified. It's telling that it wasn't the conservatives who first raised the alarm, but the old guard of the Democratic Party itself. They still hold the old views. I don't know when things were really like that, as we're discussing, but they claim it once was. At first they supported slavery, then they fought to make sure, God forbid, that black people weren't educated in the same schools. Then they organized the Ku Klux Klan, lynchings, and everything else. Then they brought black people over to their side, blackmailing that same junior, so to speak. What's his name? Yes, King Jr., right? Right. So they did all sorts of crazy things, but they say that at some point the Democratic Party had some positive ideas. So Bill Maher, probably in Russian, Yes, they call him Bill Maher. Actually, Maher. He's Maher. Bill Maher. The HBO host he called Avila Chevalier. He already talked about her. Patient zero. The infection virus is in the consciousness. He is very, very precise. And he stated that after 3 socialist victories in New York, the Democratic Party is on the right track to lose the midterm elections. Music to my ears. He is not a Republican at all. Later, he publicly told Vice President Vance in an interview that his vote is in play. In 2028, it is in play. Before, he always voted automatically. Oh, I always thought so. He always voted for the Democrats automatically, but now he won't. That is, he admitted that he might vote for a Republican. James Carville. I've already mentioned him to you. He was the architect of Bill Clinton's victory back in the day. He demanded that Avila Chevalier not be allowed into the Democratic caucus in Congress if she gets elected, and most likely she'll be elected from New York, so that when she arrives in Congress, so that she wouldn't be seated with the Democrats. God forbid anyone thinks that the Democrats think the way she does. If she wins the elections in November, he said flat out, she's not a Democrat, just don't seat her next to you. Well, he's not an elected official, he's not there, right? He publicly spoke about the need for a formal party split. That is, the few people who are chosen now will be separated from them, and he's right. Rotten or decaying things shouldn't be allowed into the body. It will start to spread. It needs to be cut off. Or, if possible, just don't let it into the body. It's like metastases that grow. God forbid you let it into your body. Among the Democrats, there is, well, as of today, 1 senator. In the previous term, there was, so to speak, 1.5. Then they left, and now there is Senator John Fetterman. He wrote on X. Actually, he was the briefest of all. So he said, this movement, I don't remember what he called it. It's anti-Israel, anti-American, anti-Western. And he doesn't understand why he's the only Democratic senator who refuses to justify their words and actions. The most amazing thing, of course, is that he's really the only person in the upper echelons of the Democratic Party who not only understands this but also says it. Everyone else has kept quiet and decided that their personal well-being is much more important than the potential demise of the country they live in. Which proves another point, namely that politicians, almost without exception, well, there's one exception, right, are like that. They are immoral, vile people, willing to do anything for their own benefit. How are they practically any different from the rest of the world's population? The key question is, will the party truly split, or in the end will the establishment and the socialists unite around their only common goal? Clinging to power tooth and nail, regardless of the ideological chasm. Historically, party machines in America almost always choose the second scenario, unity. The Democratic Party has already gone through internal wars between Southern conservatives and Northern so-called liberals, that's what they called themselves, in the mid-20th century, and between Clinton's centrists and Sanders' left wing in 2016. And each time it found a formula for a joint campaign, a campaign for votes. A campaign for votes. They put off settling ideological scores for later. They would devour each other later when they seized power. But, well, like Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, right? I mean, the Bolsheviks, against the SRs, against everyone, against everyone, against everyone. This time there is a difference, though. The split is happening not only along economic lines, but also along moral and values-based lines, like patriotism and attitudes toward American history. Here it gets a bit more complicated. It's harder to cover this up with, just rhetoric. One person says, America is a vile country, and another says, America, vote for me. America is the best country in the world. And another one nearby says, vote for me from the same party, because I believe America is the vilest country in the world. So it's easier to cover up arguments about tax rates. So here's how I assess the chances. The likelihood of a formal split of the party into 2 factions in the next cycle is low because the structures, money, and party brand are too valuable to abandon. Neither side will want to do that or walk away from it. they will fight for them from within. But there is a growing likelihood of more defectors, voters, and individual politicians who will say, I don't want to be part of this, either by voting for the Republicans or maybe just staying home. You don't have to go vote for another party, you just need to stay home. That, in my opinion, is very likely. The party won't physically split, but it will lose votes, bleeding them out slowly rather than in one big break. And then there's the mechanism of decay. That is when the party allows people to speak out a little here and a little there about things that just yesterday were unthinkable in polite society, about morality, about America, about patriotism, about Jews, about white people. And if this isn't stopped right away, it's not just an isolated incident, but the start of a process. Every time a radical statement goes unpunished, more and more people who used to stay silent because it was considered improper see that it's allowed. It's allowed. Propaganda spreads this precedent even further. The audience gets used to it, and what was once marginal becomes mainstream within the party that allowed it. That's exactly why anti-Semitism within the DSA, that's the Democrats, yes, the Democratic Socialist wing, the wing under the Democratic Party, is not just a matter of isolated incidents. This is a predictable result. It's because for several years in a row, the party didn't stop the first, still timid statements on this topic. A cancer cell that isn't removed at an early stage doesn't stay localized, it metastasizes. Today, talk about Israel as an accomplice in genocide is voiced by a candidate for the U.S. Congress as something completely legitimate. Gentlemen, this is the cost of silence. When you decide to keep quiet about something, well, someone said something, so what? Now let's talk about the practical side of this issue. How will the arrival of the Socialists, their sweeping victories, their coming out of the shadows affect the elections in November and then in 2028? Now we're going to do a little bit of speculating. Because I don't know how to predict the future, and by the way, I haven't met anyone who could, like Nostradamus or the Oracle of Delphi. I once met an interesting fortune teller who made a prediction for my friend, not me. That was the only time. And God knows, maybe she just got lucky, as they say, wherever she pointed her finger. So that means we don't know what's going to happen. But let's start with the fact that the phenomenon of so-called mass enlightenment, which we would really like to see, so what happened? So maybe a little, but it makes sense to calibrate. According to the Pew survey, this is June 26, 1926, 32% of Democrats have a positive attitude toward leaders who call themselves democratic socialists. 11% have a negative attitude, so there's already a clear advantage, and 56% are neutral. That's what scares me. What scares me is that 56% of Democrats have no idea what socialism is, what communism is, or what fascism is, and what happens when private property is taken away and turned into public property. No one ever explained it to them. And as for looking it up themselves, they're either too lazy or too stupid to do it. So within the party itself, socialists are not yet the dominant force, but rather an energetic and noticeable minority that wins some primaries, especially in big cities, and therefore creates the impression of a shift in the whole party. A split when figures like Bill Bellamar or some of the old Democrats say, "This is not my party." This is exactly the reaction of those 15 to 17 moderate and conservative Democrats. Sounds strange, right? Conservative Democrat. For them, the new tone feels foreign. Among those who call themselves progressives, liberal Democrats, or just liberals. Although a liberal is actually something completely different, but they don't even realize that. 52% have a favorable view of such leaders. The key divide is by age and ideology. Young so-called Democrats, that is. Those aged 18 to 29 support such leaders at a rate of 39%. Then, for those over 50, it immediately drops to 25%. Bogeyman. There has been a historic shift among Democrats overall. Now, as I said, 66% view socialism positively. This is the first time that more than half of Democrats, significantly more than half of Democrats, view socialism favorably. So the idea that attitudes toward the party itself are changing does have a basis, but it's changing primarily among the young and the left wing, not the entire base. Now the most important thing is the independents, because they are the ones who decide the general elections, not the primaries. The data here is pretty straightforward. Independents remain rather cool towards socialism. Among independents, capitalism has a 51% positive rating, socialism 38%. Well, the rest, as always, don't have the slightest idea about anything. What is it? Still, 51 and 38, how much is that? That's a 13-point difference. That is, the average undecided voter is more likely to be wary than inspired by the arrival of these so-called gazelles, who are actually wolves. In other words, wolves are being disguised as gazelles. That's exactly why many Democratic strategists are nervous. What mobilizes the base in primaries in New York or another blue district may alienate swing voters in battleground states during the general election. That's the core of the electoral risk, which I'm sure you've noticed. One important and substantive nuance, just to be precise. Radical rhetoric like "down with capitalism, let's destroy the old and build the new" is the language of the activist core and some parts of social media, but when they run in elections, they call themselves democratic socialists and build their campaigns on something completely different. They don't say things like that. They have it in mind. Their slogans are usually about affordable housing, rent freezes, healthcare, prices, and transportation. In other words, about your wallet, not about overthrowing the system. The thing is, these actions will lead to the destruction of the system, but you have to be able to think to figure that out, and most people who go to vote can't think. So in other words, the new Democrats, who are actually the old Marxists, will be deceiving the public, just like they deceived people in Argentina, in Cuba, I don't know, in the Soviet Union, in the GDR, wherever you look, in all the other countries where they seized power through democratic means. And then they have no intention of giving it up. The average voter doesn't react so much to the label socialist as to whether it sounds like this person is talking about my problems, not that he wants to ruin our lives. They don't understand real life. Regarding the problems, they're like, oh, he's talking about my gas prices. That's where the difference in questions comes from. The word socialism scares independents, but specific measures like rent control don't. Those specific measures are popular. Again, they don't understand what will happen next. They think everything will stay the same, just that they'll pay less. Republicans, as you correctly assume, will focus on the label and on the most radical quotes, because at the brand level, socialism benefits them because independents don't like it. So within the Democratic Party, a significant and growing part, especially young people, sincerely support this shift. So for them, it's not deception, but the desired direction. They want communism, calling it something completely different. And they consider it fair. Besides, they are young. It's when you're young that you want all the things you haven't earned yet. But they're promised that they'll be given those things, just because they're good. And those who have a lot of money, they're bad. And that's why it's morally justified to take from the bad ones in order to give to the good ones. Moderate Democrats, and especially independents, generally react with caution. And it's their reaction that will determine whether this shift will be an asset for the party or a burden. A burden such as in 1926 and 1928. The Democratic Party right now isn't so much deceiving voters as it is simply divided and lacks a unified position. And its different wings are openly pulling in the different directions. Well, we have to figure it out. After all, we came from the place they're trying to pull us toward.